Okay, beautiful. Welcome, everyone. We are really excited to be here for our second class. Do you want to say the title of our classes, Antesa?
Yeah, this is 10 dysfunctional and manipulative ways of communicating, which are pervasive in society, but which get you nowhere fast. And we're going to talk about what to do about it.
Yes, exactly. So let's just start with a big warm welcome. If you were with us last week, welcome back. If you weren't, you can certainly catch the replay. For those of you who know Antesa, I'm so glad you get to hear her on this topic. For those of you who know me, likewise. And for those of you who don't know either of us, we're going to do a quick introduction. Antisa's taking care of the back end while being present with her beautiful forward facing glory in her newly reorganized home. It looks so lovely there. Antesa is an emotional intelligence expert. She's a TEDx speaker, and she is both profoundly intuitive and extremely precise in her communication. It makes for such an incredible combination because many people who are intuitive like Antesa end up being kind of woo and vague and indirect. And she is precise, expressing what she accesses with her intuition and amazing lived experience, many layers of her biography, including incredible triumphs, both recognized by others and only herself, as well as some of the most devastating challenges, again, some recognized by others and some not. So I present to you my beloved colleague, Antesa. I am a physician, a luxury love and intimacy mentor, and I navigate the world through communication. Everything truly is a communication for me, and I had a long time in my life where I was confused why people didn't understand what was being conveyed the way I did. And I came to realize, oh, they're mostly paying attention to the words, or maybe the words and the vibe. But there's so much more that contributes to the quality and breadth of a communication. And so this is something that I focus on when interacting with myself, that I focus on in interacting with my husband of 24 years, 25 years, my 4 children, any individuals or couples I coach, and my friends at large. So this brings us to this conversation. I guess one more point to just make up front and center is that Antisa and I have had all kinds of different relationships. She's been my client. She's guided and educated me on various things. We've had all kinds of dancing positions in the dance we share. And we are so excited for the first time ever to be co-leading a retreat that honestly, of course, Antisa, you could lead entirely on your own and it would be totally magnificent. I could lead on my own, it would be totally magnificent. And we're really, really excited for the synergy and for anyone who comes to our retreat to experience that as well. The retreat will be August 13th to 15th in absolutely stunning Occidental, California. And if you'd like to join us, we'll have the information to apply below this video. And I guess the one last thing to say about the retreat is that Antisa's birthday was June 1st. Mine is June 21st. And in celebration of our birthday month, you're welcome to take $100 off of the enrollment fee if you register before my birthday and the close of our birthday season. So these classes, this is the second one of 4, are intended to be a full curriculum. We want you to benefit. We want you to have insights and transformation as you play and explore in how you think about things and in how you communicate. And it definitely also is to share with you who we are and how we work together as a form of extending an invitation to join us for this retreat, which it's obviously ours and any participants get likely to be the first in-person retreat since pre-COVID. And we are so excited to have a really gentle reintegration into in-person events. So it looks like you're all set with the tech. Anything you want to add before we dive in, Antesa?
Yes, only because you introduced me so beautifully and you introduced yourself so beautifully. And I want to share something that I shared with Alexandra offline between these calls as we were reflecting and communicating and finding our new right now. And the truth is that in the time that I have been both a client, a mentee, a friend, a peer of Alexandra's, I have in many ways learned what I share now as a big part of my offering professionally through studying Alexandra. And I say that with love, not as like a criticism, but as in I knew that I was on the receiving end of something incredibly rare with her. And it was really important to me that if I was going to invest in myself in that way, that I could give other people the experience that she seemingly effortlessly gave to me in her uh, gentle and clear communication. And so, what you're experiencing with the two of us on these lives is my integration of years of that deep level of intimacy that Alexandra and I have created together, my capacity to put language on my experience, which is something I'm pretty good at. And we are, as Alexandra has said, so excited to get to share. And it's not just, one of us or two of us, that neither of us would want to do this event alone, because actually the wisdom that's coming through is a direct result of the power of our relationship and our desire to let other people know that it's possible to relate in this way. And so without further ado, I think that I would love to have Alexandra introduce the first one, but maybe we should just briefly
Yeah, do a review. Yeah,
yeah.
you do.
So for those of you guys who had the opportunity to watch last week, it was around the same time last Sunday. And if you didn't see that, you can find that on my Facebook profile. We talked about the first 2 of 10 of these dysfunctional ways of communicating, which are pervasive in society. And those 2 were similar in vein, but with subtle differences. And they were making assumptions about what other people want without actually asking them. And then the second one was anticipating other people's needs without asking them. And those would fall into the category of rescuer behavior. It's, really a self-preservation mechanism. And we had a beautiful conversation about that last week. So we won't spend much more time on that. But for those of you who missed it, go back and watch it. It's a great call. Lots of really rich information. And many of you gave me feedback afterward. I think Alexandra also got incredible feedback afterward that it was really helpful. And we hope that these are all really helpful and want you to know that they're just the tip of the iceberg of what we have in store for you in August. So
Yeah, and if you want to find that conversation, just scroll back either on Antisa's page or mine.
yeah.
It's not buried. Okay, beautiful. So we're going to transition into our third point. One moment. And
While she's drinking that, I just want to say, if you are watching us live, leave a comment and let us know that you're here. I don't know why, but I can't see, but I can see that there are people watching live. And if you say, I'm watching you live and we are so excited to be here and why you're here, I think that Alexandra and I would both love to hear from you. And if you're watching the replay, there's a lot of ninjas and stealth Facebookers. And I personally really I want to know who's sharing my posts. I want to know who's reading my content. So share and come say hello, and we'd be so happy.
yes, exactly. So do that. And let's also acknowledge that this conversation was scheduled as an event. It was scheduled to start at 10:30 a.m. Pacific. What time in Denmark?
7:30.
7:30, and we actually got started, I think, about 20 minutes late. And as I go into the third point we want to make, I'm going to explain why that was, but I just want to acknowledge it. Antesa and I are pretty punctual people, and there's a context for our tardiness, so please bear with us. So, our third dysfunctional behavior is not expressing your needs to others and then getting resentful when your needs aren't met. That is just so incredibly potent and true. And I know this a million times over in my own life. And I actually want to share both why we got started late and how I have transformed this pattern, as well as how I'm stuck in it. So this morning, I was driving on the highway in the San Francisco Bay Area, moving along. I don't know exactly how quickly. I'm thinking it was 50 miles an hour, maybe. And of course, from the driver's lessons, we know you're supposed to be 6 car lengths between cars, and that just doesn't happen in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I'm driving along on the highway, and the person in front of me slowed rather suddenly, and I slammed my brakes on, and time slowed, and I thought, like, I could see this was easily about to be a 10-car accident, but I avoided hitting the car in front of me. I am so thankful for that. And the pickup truck with not snowmobiles, what were they? Motorcycles? I don't know what they were. 2 things behind. He put his foot on the brake really rapidly and swerved, but in the process, he hit me pretty hard in the back of my car. So the reason we started late is that I was in a car accident, and so I couldn't be home on time. But what happened is exactly what happens for me. And when I called, so first of all, I am very grateful that when a car is hit in the rear, at least the car I have, it doesn't affect the engine. So my entire bumper came off. I put it in my front seat, and I ended up driving home without, I mean, a little shaken up, but without much ado. And I'm physically fine. I'm a little tense in the neck, but I'm totally fine. But I called my husband, and he said, "How are you?" And I proceeded to tell him, "Well, it's exactly my usual pattern. When something intense happens, something stressful happens, an accident, I immediately am internally extremely calm and very oriented to other people's needs. So even though the guy behind me hit me, it wasn't really his fault. He was doing the best he could in that particular circumstance. But I got out of the car and I immediately said, I'm physically fine, so that they wouldn't have to worry about that. And I just kept thanking them, for he and his wife, for being so kind and so decent. It was one of my main communications, was to make sure that his feelings were okay. And then once I did all of that, I looked at my car more closely to assess what the situation was. And I completely held it together. We took care of the insurance. I again, about 65% of what I said was to thank them for being so decent and for having paid attention, because this could have been a much worse accident. And as I'm telling my husband all of this, because this is my pattern, I said, and then once it's all over and I get home, then I collapse and get snippy with you. And I told my husband, I'm going to do my best not to get snippy with you, but I'd really appreciate it if I could just collapse in your arms when I get home. And that is my pattern in response to stress. Now, when we talk about not expressing our needs to others, it's usually not in response to a car accident. But how we are is how we are. And so whether it's my son's leaving the toilet seat up, or my husband not paying enough attention to me, or some stranger rear-ending me in a situation where everyone was doing their best, in all of those scenarios, and pretty much any other one that comes my way, my first response is to make sure everyone else feels okay, to stay calm, hold it together, have the emotions handled. And then once that's the case, then out I come with a little bit of venom, which, as stress responses go, is pretty good because the venom comes out when the whole thing is over, except with my husband. But how much better it is when we can take a moment and actually identify our needs. And so, while when I got hit, but my car got hit today, I didn't demonstrate it. The fact is that in my interactions with my husband and with others, I do definitely remind myself to take a moment to identify what I need and express that, because that is the best I can do for having that need met.
It's a good story, and I'm also very glad that you're okay and that it wasn't a 10-car pileup story on the freeway. So, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it was actually funny when it happened. I didn't realize right away that I'd be able to just drive myself home, but then I thought, oh, this was a communication. This is a communication between me and myself. It's a communication between me and this other driver. They're between me and the universe. And I need to hear what the communication is.
That can we open that up, because I actually think with that's my jam, and I think it's your jam. I know it's your jam. And there might be people on here who don't know what you mean when you say that. And I don't know if you want to explain that a little bit, but I can also, if you want to.
Wait. There's a communication here. Because Selena has said, I'm watching live, got someone tiny next to me.
Wait, I can't see that.
That is a communication. Selena, communicate with
Selena,
us some more.
congratulations.
I've been looking. I've been thinking of you. Someone tiny. Ooh, were some of the first sounds the tiny person hears.
That's
Well,
amazing.
if you want to share more, even as we talk about dysfunctional communication patterns, we are always available for a very meaningful and functional communication, and a big warm welcome to that tiny creature you have there.
And if you want to post a picture, I wouldn't be upset about it.
Okay, well, Selena
So,
knows, so she can do what she likes.
yes. So
All right.
let's just unwrap that before we go on. And it's that when we talk about everything being in communication, the first 5 of our list of 10 are things that get communicated that do not exist within the realm of words. And so when we talk about communication, most people think about what you're physically saying. Some people might also think about your tone, the tone of your voice, or your body language. But the truth is that there is communication happening in the space between words. There's communication happening between you and inanimate objects. There's communication happening between you and the planet, you and the universe. And what Alexandra just pointed to is really, really important, is that there's a communication in events that happen in our lives. And I actually just read about this too yesterday, is that, you know, if you're the type of person who's not really sure you're on a sort of a seeking for spiritual evolution path, chances are pretty likely you will know, because you will be invited regularly to build more resilience, to build more agility, to build more compassion, because of events in your life, because of people you have to happen to be interacting with. Those are communications too. So this is like a bonus one, actually, because there are communications that don't happen even between two people, but which say something subtle. And in the case of accidents and injuries, it could just be, you know, pay a little bit closer attention. I'm not saying that this is what's going on with Alexandra, but, or like, slow down, you know, like those are often the some of the subtle communications that happen when you have an accident, is like, slow down, be more deliberate, don't rush, there's no need to rush. So those are actually communications too. So I love that that was brought in.
Yeah, and actually, for me in this instance, it was very significant what I was thinking about
Ooh.
while I was driving, because I think if I was thinking about something else, it's possible I might have slowed down 2 seconds sooner, and 2 seconds is a lot in a moment like that.
Mm.
And I want to add that when I learned this concept, well, one of the times I learned it, I really love referring to this as divine semantics.
Mhm.
It's like, when what are you talking about in your coaching session when the ambulance drives by outside?
Mm.
Or when you suddenly hear birds making a ruckus? Or you're thinking about something and then you see a street sign and the name of the street is Freedom.
There's an
That
ambulance going by right now.
okay, perfect. Perfect. That's so good. That's so funny.
Thank you,
And
God.
right, we see you.
Hi.
And likewise, that when I have a car accident, I mean, I literally sort of like a blimp writing on the clouds. I think of God's handwriting,
Mhm.
divine semantics in the communication. And I'm also clear that this accident today, yes, no accident would have been ideal, but with all the different scenarios, this was far and away the least harmful way that this could play out. And I have such gratitude for a message that was a little lower volume. I'm still paying attention.
Amazing. Do you want to share what you were, did you say what you were thinking specifically? No, I don't know if it's
I
private.
don't want to,
You don't have to
it's
share it.
too far afield, and we had the plan to be more structured today and a little bit less meandering. So this would be honoring that.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, we're not going to, because you and I like to cover a lot of ground and a lot of depth and really explore a lot of terrain. But we could do an entire retreat on the topic of not expressing our needs to others and then becoming resentful when those needs are not met, which I say as a way to bold, highlight, italicize, and underline. If you're watching, you could think about what you're resentful about and track it back to unexpressed needs.
Mhm.
You could look at where your needs are not met and identify where you need to express your need for them. One of the first places to start is just to first off identify what your needs really are. And honestly, when I was hit by the car, I this is my way of responding to stress, is that I completely lost touch with what my needs are. My only need was to make sure everyone else was emotionally attended to, which honestly is a need of mine because it's easier for me to navigate if other people aren't blowing up, but or collapsing or furious or whatever the case may be. But I think there's another level of my own needs that I could turn to more rapidly.
Oh, always. And that's a really important point is that actually, when we talk about needs, they're constantly evolving. They are a living organism like everything else. And so I actually don't know. I have not yet reached a point where I haven't had a nice opportunity to rediscover more nuance in my needs yet. I don't think you have either, Alexandra. And this is the thing that I think is so beautiful is that we're never arrived. We are always arriving. And, finding out a new level of needs is a great adventure along with everything else. And there's always an opportunity to get more detail in there for sure. Um, and I had it in my mind that with these ones that we're talking about today, that we'd also talk about like what literally the communication is when you are not expressing your needs to other and getting resentful about it. And I would say that the communication is I expect you to be a psychic mind reader and I expect you to be superhuman and perfect. And when you're not those things, I believe that you deserve to be punished with my resentment. And
I want to
resentment,
add one more,
yeah.
which particularly comes up in intimate relationships,
Mhm.
which is I want you to know me better than I know myself.
Yeah, which is a form of helplessness, which exists for a lot of people. True.
Yeah, it's the ultimate victimhood
Hmm.
in a romantic relationship, probably all relationships, but it really is key in a romantic relationship.
Hmm.
And it is when you make it your priority to know yourself better than your partner know than you want your partner to know you, it just opens up so much beauty.
Yeah, everything changes. And that is the pervasive part, actually. The point that you make is I know most women um, desire to have a partner who knows her better than she knows herself and doesn't realize that there is a way in which you give your agency and your sovereignty away and your power when you expect other people to just learn you completely without you having not learned yourself first, without you having learned yourself first. And so instead of teaching somebody how to anticipate your needs in a way that's functional and healthy in a relationship, you expect to have someone just crack the code of you from the starting gate. And that is very, very pervasive in most relationships, I would say, on some level at least.
Yes, and it leads to many different things, including the fact that you basically let someone else tell you who you are.
Mm,
And that's very different than identifying who you are using input from other people's response to you.
mm. If we had a
Somebody gave a heart with that. If you're watching, let us know. It's going to feel like more of a party and more of an engagement. That is me expressing my need to the audience. It doesn't mean you need to meet it, but I have a need slash a desire. Those two are very similar to know who's watching and what you're thinking.
I'm the
Are-
same way. I don't like having one-sided conversations. I really like to know whose energy is in the room.
Okay, but in all fairness, this platform is set up for a one-sided conversation, so we need to
Maybe we need to find a new platform.
that means you need to express your needs before we set it up as a Facebook Live. But anyway, since this is where we are, oh, okay. Yasmin Shelbea says, "Hi, lovely angels." Do you know
Hi,
Yasmin?
Yasmin. Yeah, I know Yasmin. Hi,
Okay,
good to see you. I don't know why, but you keep reading the comments because I'm not getting those updates and I don't understand why, but
I
if
will because I learned how because you taught me.
okay, well, I apparently was just winging it. I don't remember. And
Okay, well, anyway, I have access to them. And Yasmin, thank you so much. That is such a what beautiful energy you've contributed to the conversation.
she's
That's
an
really
enormous
lovely.
heart. I love Yasmin. Okay. Shall we move on?
Yes. Definitely.
Okay, so the fourth, uh, dysfunctional and manipulative, that's a really long title. But the fourth one is not asking questions that you need the answer to in order to feel secure in a relationship, because you're terrified of the answer. So I'm going to say it one more time because these are long. Not asking the questions you need the answers to in order to feel secure in a relationship because you're terrified of the answer. And I like to lovingly call this relationship contortionism. When I talk to, because this,
Well, as soon as you say this, it reminds me, in childhood, our beloved cat was really a wild cat. And so I can't tell you how many times I went to bed with her on my bed, and I would like do everything, because if I just touched her the wrong way or adjusted her a little bit, she was out of there. And
oh
so,
no, that's a
but
good
that's what
example.
you're describing. Like my childhood contortion so that my wild cat would keep purring in my bed
Yeah,
is what you're
that's
describing
what
in
I'm
your
describing.
relationship.
Yes, and if you don't know what contortionism is, like it's common in Asia. I think there's a lot of contortionists in Asia. They're the ones that are super super bendy kind of gymnasts who can bend their bodies in half in ways that look like their bones should break, but they don't. And when you're talking about it from an energetic standpoint in relationship and friendship and jobs and any nature of relationship contortionism is a real thing. It's I guess what you, if you were on the outside looking in, what you might see is that your friend enters into a new relationship and then suddenly they're not your friend anymore. You don't recognize who they are. You have no idea what's happened. And the communication of that is, I would rather abandon myself than be abandoned or rejected by this person who I want to be with. That's the communication that you're actually making, because when you're a relationship contortionist, what you're doing is bending in all possible ways in order to keep the peace. This is really common with people who like to keep the peace or like to avoid conflict in relationships, to be considered desirable and good enough to be given a yes. And I have a really funny
You know
story.
what? I want to hear your story, but I want to, from my perspective, adjust that slightly.
Okay.
Say again what you said about I want to abandon myself. What did you say?
I would rather abandon myself than be abandoned. So like
Yes.
contort
Yeah,
yourself so that you don't
I,
get
I,
in
I
the,
understand it.
yeah.
And I think that's true, but that is your provocative way of expressing it. And I want to say the exact same thing in my softer way, but it's the exact same meaning,
Mhm.
which is that it's more uncomfortable to have the other person disconnect than to be disconnected from yourself.
Yeah.
But I mean the same thing. So say it in your provocative way again.
My provocative way is I would rather abandon myself by contorting myself than feel abandoned or rejected by a partner or a friend or a parent or a sibling or whoever.
Totally, totally. So I just think someone in that state is not likely to say, "Oh yeah, yeah, me, I'd rather abandon myself." But it's
That's the
like
communication though.
that is totally the communication, although the internal feeling is
Yes.
it's more uncomfortable to be disconnected from the other person than to sorry, it's more uncomfortable to risk disconnection from the other person
Yeah.
than to be disconnected with myself. And yes, I know so many people who walk around feeling disconnected from themselves in an effort to improve their relationships, when of course that's exactly backwards. So tell us the story.
Okay, you guys are gonna love this story. And the thing I want to share before that I think that is, I know for me when I when I learned this, which by the way I was like well into my 30s when I learned this, um, the notion that no could potentially be a loving or more loving response than yes just rocked my world. That someone was willing to be honest with me about their intentions, about what they are available or not available for, about what their needs are, is actually incredibly loving. And for whatever reason, I had a crosswire there where there's probably plenty of reasons, but I had a crosswire there where I thought that no was the end of the world for a very, very long time. Like every relationship that I had until I was probably 33 years old involved my mastery in relationship contortionism, which actually, because I didn't like that feeling of losing myself, I tended to avoid relationships, and then I would get lovesick and then lose myself in the process of getting lovesick, and then thought that the only solution was to break up and be single again in order to resolve relationship contortionism, which was something that I was conflicted by, like in the way that 1700 century people are conflicted by love, you know, like by triangular love. You know, it was just I was very, very dramatic inside of my own body. And this started really early for me. So this is the funny story. I regularly had like ridiculous crushes, and I would develop crushes on boys at school who I had never talked to before. Like I had never had a conversation with them, and I would stalk them. I would know their addresses. I would really just like, you know, I had their phone numbers memorized. And I had a crush on this boy in fifth grade who was a musician, and I thought he had the most beautiful eyes. And I started sending him love notes with my mom's typewriter so that no one could detect my handwriting. I was like 10, 11. And one day I heard him talking about who he thought it might be. And I found out that he thought it was one of my friends, actually. He didn't think it was me. And I really wanted him to know eventually that it was not her. Like it was more important to me that I knew that he knew that it was not her than for him to continue this speculation and leave me out of the conversation. Because if he was having romantic feelings for me, I wanted him to know that those letters that were so passionate about how wonderful he was were coming from me. And so one day I wrote him a letter where I revealed myself to him, and I put it on his desk, and I let him know that I wanted him to be my boyfriend, and I thought we were going to get married because that's just what you did in fifth grade. And I asked him, would you like to go out with me? And then I wrote yes and maybe, and asked him to circle one. And then we went off to recess, and I hid around the corner and like tried to spy on him while he was playing wall ball, and then came back and I had that note on my table, and in it in very large red ink was the words no circled in red ink. I was devastated. Not only was I humiliated, but I was devastated because I had my imagination had already like we I was already practicing his last name with my first name. That was where I was going with it. And that for me is just a it's an excellent um, childlike illustration of what this looks like. Is like, I can't bear to hear you say no to me, and so I'm not even going to give you an option. I'm going to only ask you questions that you can say yes to, or maybe to, or not yet to, but definitely not no. And I recognize this behavior in myself in a relationship that I had a little bit before you and I met, Alexandra. And it was the first time that I learned that actually it would benefit me. I would rather have his no or his clarity because it felt more kind than to continue to push for the yes, the maybe, which was actually driving me crazy. Like it was actually making me feel totally insane in our relationship because that terror, it was like fuel, but it was also really destructive. So that's the story. And that's the communication as well, is, you know, for me, that was actually really how it lived inside of myself. Was no was the danger zone. And now I love it when men say no to me. It's like my favorite
So
thing.
it doesn't happen very often, does it?
It doesn't happen very often. But I actually said this on the men's the open house that I led a week and a half ago, is that like, as a sovereign, powerful woman, there is nothing that turns me on more than a man who says no. And it's not because he wants to tease me and mess with my mind. It's because he is so in tune with the environment that we share that he's also not willing to move any faster than I'm willing to move or can move in a way that allows me to be present. And now I crave that. I yearn
But
for.
let's just be clear that no does not mean no, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean no, I don't know how. It
right,
doesn't mean no, I can't really deal with the intensity. It doesn't mean it's the kind of no you're talking about is not a turning away no.
right.
It's a
It's a slowing down.
I see you, I see me, I see what is happening between us, and therefore I am a no.
Yes.
That's just so that people aren't
And
listening and thinking,
we're going to
"No."
teach this in the workshop, so we should maybe hint to this is the power of being able to say no while you're a yes to a connection. Because so many people want to know how to do that, because oftentimes when you say no, you're defending yourself or you're blaming somebody else for something.
Or
And
pushing you
Alexandra
away.
and I are pushing them away. And Alexandra and I both strongly believe that it's possible to say no while being a yes to who a person is. And that's what I'm talking about, actually. And we're going to teach about that at the retreat. We're not going to talk about it today, but that's a teaser for
Yeah,
some
excellent,
huge,
excellent. Because
huge
because
value.
that no is a yes to the person saying it and a yes to the person hearing it
Yeah.
while being a true no.
Yes, exactly.
So complex, but very straightforward.
Yes.
Okay, let's go on to the next point.
The next one is spending time only with people like you so that you can avoid conflict and not ever feel triggered. And how is this a communication? Let me tell you. This is a communication because what you're basically saying in this communication, this is probably not what you're thinking, but what you're saying is, I prefer comfort over self discovery. And why is it that way? Well, because when you're triggered, all that is information for you. That's all that's happening. Information for you. A trigger is like a litmus test. It tells you, it's like a feedback loop about where you need to heal, where you need to slow down, where you might need to take some inventory of what your needs are. Um, and the truth is that while change is our birthright, we are creatures of habit. And our inclination, and I would say especially right now, is to surround ourselves with people who see the world like I do, because we want people to say, I agree with you. Because when you start to disagree, it's like your vision of the fabric of society starts to dissolve really quickly right now, because there are such contrasting opinions on topics that really are weaved into our lives. And um, my story is not how I do this, but it's actually how I don't do this, because this is actually one of my probably my greatest gifts that I have always really naturally done. Is I'm a person who requires variety in my life. I'm very, very much in that way a true Gemini. I get very, very bored with the monotony of having the same type of people around. And this has been true of me since I was very young. I always had friends from different social circles, different age groups, the whole spectrum. And I never worried about bringing them together, because I figured if they had me in common, they'd find a point of connection. And I would always throw these big parties where people from, 6 different groups would come together. And there is something I believe really strongly in, which is that transformation requires some level of adversity. And um, it's a good thing when people disagree with you. And it's not necessarily dangerous when people disagree with you. And learning how to listen to contrast and polarity, um, it can be uncomfortable. It can be really, really challenging, especially right now, because we've made our minds up about certain things in life, particularly social issues. And we think that there must be something intrinsically wrong with a person if they believe the opposite thing that we believe. And my best example of this is my relationship with my mother, who for years we just did not see eye to eye. And as a result of me thinking she was crazy. She may watch this. We've had conversations about this now, but there was a time where I really thought that she was a Looney Tune, and I didn't listen to her, and I pushed her away, and I did my due diligence as a daughter to like pretend that I was invested in the relationship, even though I really wasn't, because we had such different lives. that it just seemed too far-fetched to try to understand her. And I would say that now my biggest growth has come from learning to listen to my mom and truly listen to her, not just to like have her feel heard, but to um, understand where she is coming from when she presents something to my world that seems like it's the opposite. And that belief system that goes within that is that I believe that we are all intrinsically connected. And so her being what I think is opposite of me is actually just showing me a part of myself, which I might be blind to. And my consciousness has expanded massively as a result of me being willing to look my mother square in the eyes and ask her genuinely curious questions about how she sees the world and willing to consider them. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I agree with her now. And that's the thing that's so amazing about it. And if we constantly choose to only live in a world where our beliefs are reflected in our environment, we actually stunt our growth. And so I see this a lot actually in the spiritual community, as everybody wants to be isolated from the world and the spiritual community. And I gotta say, the people doing the biggest work in the world, the biggest, bodhisattvas in the world, they're out in the world, living in the world, potentially not surrounded at all. I mean, they're in spiritual deserts and places where, people don't have that kind of path. And that's where the most transformation happens for that individual. And that's where the biggest impact is also possible. And I feel really strongly about that. So I slid that one in here like someone slides into your DMs, because I just needed a platform to say that thing out loud, because it's probably one of my biggest values is to bring variety in the form of belief systems back into our life. That diversity of thought is so essential in terms of nourishment of someone's soul. And to throw that away because of differences of opinion is just a travesty as far as I'm concerned. So that's the
I totally agree, and I have a very practical suggestion on how to go about doing that.
yes, let's hear it.
Um, I learned this from someone. Oops. Um, I'm wondering if that's related to my car situation, but I can't deal with that now because here we are having our communication. So, um, what I wanted to say is that, that I've had dinner with a number of people recently, and I have seen the impact of one person says something, whatever it, you know what? I'm gonna go on mute with, oh no, okay, well, whatever. So, sorry. Um, that, anyway, um, this must be very important, what I'm about to say. And maybe that's important too, and I'll get to it shortly. So, um,
We'll wrap up
that,
after this anyway. So
yeah. So one person says something. These are with a lot of conversations about the political situation in Israel.
mm,
One person says something, and the other person says, I disagree with you, and then gives their opinion.
yeah.
That generally does not go anywhere helpful.
Mm-mm.
But one person says their opinion, and the other person places their opinion next to it without making the point, I disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation can be heard so much more simply.
Yes.
And so there's a way in which we can hear yeses and nos in various forms a lot more easily when we're just listening to what is said without needing to calculate our stance towards it.
Yes. And I will add on to that too, that like, if you wanted to take that even one step further, it would be to not feel like you need to rush so quickly to a conclusion about what the right or true answer is, and to say, oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that perspective before. Can you tell me more about that? And
Yes.
and to truly, from curiosity, not from like this is the right way to say it, but like, wow, I just traveled to Georgia and people eat differently here, and I want to understand what their food culture is, and treating people like they're a new country. their belief systems are their belief systems. And what a
And that's true whether you mean Georgia the country or Georgia the
state.
state.
Exactly. Yeah, I always use that as an example, and then I always forget that, living in Europe, I forget that there's, anyway,
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's good.
there's two Georgias. But that paints an interesting picture, because as an American, you're so America centric that when someone says Georgia, you think you're talking about Atlanta and not Tbilisi, which is an international metropolitan hub in its own right for the rest of the country, for the rest of the world. Like, it is really to learn how to zoom out of your way of thinking and to practice, just as though you were putting new glasses on, putting on someone else's lenses for a moment, to just look through the world, or look through the lenses and see the world from their perspective. You could learn something, even if you eventually go back and stick with what you originally believed. You become less rigid in your belief systems, and more loving energy can get through. Like, I have really strong opinions about a lot of things, but I am so good at sitting and being neutral while I listen to other people, and I allow what I hear to inform my opinions. And this is something that I think is an actual skill that you can develop. You have to practice it, and you have to practice it by listening to people who don't necessarily think the same way that you do. And the challenge is,
Well, let's be clear. You need to learn how and then practice it that way.
yeah,
And I want to transition to say that as we talk about all of these different dysfunctional methods of communication and talk about how to transform and make our communications more nourishing, more satisfying, more authentic, and more forward moving rather than stagnant and frustrating or unexpressed, we both have conviction that communicating well in a way that is true to you is entirely a learnable skill. And
yeah,
this is exactly why we have designed this retreat
yeah,
in order to share it. No matter what your level of communication and how good you feel about your capacity to express yourself well, when you arrive, you'll have the skills you have, and a result of what we teach, you will be significantly more successful in your communications. No matter where you're starting, you will be more successful, more authentic, which means being more heard, more responded to, more self directed in your inner world and the world around you. And we want to invite you to join us. So we'll put, or maybe you already put
I
the
already
link
put the
there.
link
Yeah,
in. Yeah,
put the link there. Apply. As I said at the beginning, there is $100 off if you join between our birthdays, which means you have until June 21st to apply. Reach out and ask us any questions. I guess I just really want to add that there are going to be 3 forms of education, at least 3, available during the retreat. One is clear, practical, actionable instruction.
mm,
Another is much more the paradigm and framework and conceptual context that we're using, which becomes very interesting the more you practice with the actual skills and the application. And just being in an environment of genuine, authentic, intentional, sometimes risky, always courageous communication naturally raises your baseline from whatever it is to a lot higher, because so much of communication comes from permission. So part of the permission you'll just access through osmosis, through being in the presence of others as we work on this. And part of it you will give yourself as a result of building skills, building courage, and building ways of thinking about things. Anything you want to add about the retreat?
yeah. It seems a bit like random to say so, but I was thinking it as I was listening to you talk, and I think it bears mentioning is that not only are we teaching about communication, but there's something quite powerful in me and Alexandra coming together on this. And it's that Alexandra first of all, has homeschooled 4 incredible children. You also grew up in the Waldorf school system, which if anybody knows about that program, it's that it's designed quite specifically to really ensure that each child learns well and also uses their own agency in that process. I won't even have more to say to it than that, but it's a really, really unique educational program that really empowers children to be in charge of the way that they learn, and it's experiential and it's very unique. It's not like a typical didactic public education that you would have in most schools, where there's a notion of like sharing message and regurgitation is your evidence of having learned something, which is so common in most public educations. I have a background in teaching as well. I've taught swim lessons, I've taught French horn lessons, I've taught voice lessons, I've taught French and Danish. And so between the two of us, not only are we teaching about communication, but we actually are both in our own rights quite good teachers. And in a world where people are trying to not teach and coach, but they're actually just telling you what to do and giving advice, I think that that's actually a really important thing to note, is that both you and I have great amounts of success in our ability to teach in a way that empowers other people to take something and run with it on their own, completely after working together. And I thought of that as you were sharing it, because it is something actually quite unique in terms of our industry, where people don't have any experience teaching. They just get really smart because they've learned something while they went to a workshop, and they just want to dump it on their clients for money. And we're doing this because we care about communication, and we're doing it because we're both exquisite teachers and we understand the value of going for that. And we wouldn't want to not do it because we care so much about this topic. And
Yeah,
we,
absolutely. And in fact, if you're listening and you are excellent at communication, please hold your own retreats. There is a huge need for this.
mm,
And if you want to be more authentic, more self expressed, more successful, more confident, respond when something arises, join us so we can teach you how.
yes, and it's going to be beautiful with,
It's going to be beautiful. Let's leave it there.
okay. Thank you everyone for coming. As you know, the link to the event is in the comments. Come join us next Sunday around the same time, I think. Maybe it's at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and 7 p.m., I think. Don't quote me on that. Follow both Alexandra
10
and I.
9 a.m. next week.
Okay, right, 9 a.m. So it's an hour and a half earlier than we started this time. And come join us. We love when people are here to join, and we would love to hear from you if you've been watching. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye.
Bye.